Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at SmithWeekly, including Jack T., Ryan S., Sean M., and Andy S. On the program today is a returning guest. Dr. Keith Barron is back with us. Keith is the CEO, President, and Chairman of Aurania Resources. The company is focused primarily on gold exploration in Ecuador with a notable 2,080 square kilometer concession package, including its Los Cities project as the main focus. In addition to gold, the company is further exploring for silver, copper, and other base metals. The company also has exploration exposure in France. Keith and his team discovered the Fruta del Norte epithermal gold-silver deposit in Ecuador, a Tier 1 deposit now in production by Lundin Gold. Aurania Resources is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol ARU and also on the US OTC markets under the symbol AUIAF. Dr. Barron, it's a pleasure to have you back on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Keith, well, great to have you back here to talk the company and get an update from you. But before we do that, why don't we get going here with you giving us your thoughts on the junior natural resource markets sentiment in the sector and what your outlook is going forward here. Say you pick your time frame, but maybe over the next year.
Okay, well, the sentiment, as you know, is lousy, but I do believe it's going to turn around. Certainly, we've seen very, very robust metal prices, especially gold. Gold is flirting again with an all-time high, and the companies that are producing gold are throwing off profits. They're throwing off money right now. Lundin Gold, who you mentioned, is now debt free. They've bought back their stream, and gosh, they're just coining money because they're producing gold at something like $800 an ounce, and of course they're receiving 2,500 for it. It's a great time for them to be producing gold. You know what happens in the junior sector when the gold price is low, or other metal prices, it really, geologically speaking, the odds of finding a deposit that's going to be economic, to be worthwhile, to be exploitable are so much lower when the metal prices are low. So the chances of finding something that's going to be not just mildly able to recoup profits and make a bit of money for shareholders. Certainly, in a situation now where we've got all-time high gold prices, I mean, there's no better time. I just wish that the whole sector was cashed up better. People have been beguiled away to the Magnificent Seven and AI and all this other stuff. I think there will be a switch. I think there is already starting to be a movement away from some of these darling stocks and into resource sector stocks because, we're working with tangibles. We know that with the green electric renaissance, it's going to get harder and harder to find copper around the world. We know there's shortages coming, in fact, shortages that are on us already. And this is very, very bullish in many ways for many metals. So I think the sector, and I've seen this before. I've been in this business for 42 years, and this is, I guess, maybe my sixth or seventh time seeing a sector downturn, and it always does come back. And what happened with my former company, Aurelian, which found Fruta del Norte. Well, we were going through a whole bunch of market malaise back in the early 2000s. I started the company back in 2001. Had a very, very rough time getting it financed in 2003, but managed to do it. And basically turned a piece of almost worthless real estate into something worth more than 30 billion bucks. Uh, the share price went from 30 cents all the way to $43. It made a lot of people millionaires. Um, and I was very fortunate that I was a larger shareholder. And my success at Aurelian has been largely bankrolling what I'm doing today in Aurania. And Aurania's project in Ecuador is only about 100 kilometers to the north of where I was previously working back through the 2000s. And we're in exactly the same geological belt, finding very, very similar sorts of things. And it's probably, well, to my mind, it's one of the best places in the world to be doing exploration from the geological point of view. Um, it might be argued that politically it's not the best place, but geology doesn't respect political borders. When I started way back in 2001, I was told that Ecuador was only good for small mines, artisanal mining, and the place to be was Peru. Well, the favorable geology of Peru just goes across the border straight into Ecuador, and I knew it, and it was a question of uh, dedicating time and resources and having the best people that I could on my team to go out and explore a very, very big land package. We had 94,000 hectares back then. Now I've got 208,000, more than double, working in the northern part of the belt, and we've found all kinds of stuff. So, how do I feel about the sector? I feel bullish. I think that our company, certainly the share price is back off the deck, and we're doing well, and we're rebuilding, and yeah, I think the future is going to be great.
Keith, thank you for that. It's always good to have those comments from someone who has the position and perspective that you do, and also the time frame and experience, which is very important to understand. And these things always seem to take much longer than investors can palate from most of the time. And you have all these other shifts and distractions that are happening in the market as well. And it's quite an interesting time here, but we do see some very good things lining up here for the sector, and obviously very much needed as well, irrespective of market conditions. Very much needed exploration and good deposits found to replace depletion and also replace stupidity too. With respect to a lot of the ways of different jurisdictions not to want to develop natural resources, but of course they use them. So it's interesting in that context as well. So appreciate the comments on Peru and also Ecuador as well. And I'm sure you and I could probably talk jurisdictions for the entire podcast as well. But want to move to some of the recent company news, Keith. The company continues exploration work at Lost Cities. Just recently closed up an equity financing in May, as well as there was a divestment of some exploration projects in Peru. Talk about those things.
Okay, well, the divestment, we found that we just simply didn't have the bandwidth to do everything all at once. Now we have retained a royalty interest in Peru, and we'll see where that goes. But that project's gone into other hands. The reason that we acquired that project in the first place, and we acquired it through staking land in Peru, was because it was on strike, or what we mean on trend, with a discovery that we had made in Ecuador of copper and silver hosted in sediments. And we're the very, very first company to find that ever in Ecuador. And so across the border into Peru, we were looking for rocks of similar age and similar composition that would be likely to have the same sort of mineralization in them. So that was the reason for that. Gosh, we are ongoing with the exploration. Right now, the last press release we talked about, we found some gold, quite a bit of gold through just surface sampling in one area. I've got a crew right now trying to track that down to see where it's actually coming from the bedrock. Um, as you can appreciate, none of this is very easy. It's terrain that is completely covered by jungle. There's not a lot of rock sticking up out of the ground. Through all the work that I've been doing in Ecuador for over 20 years, and even previous to that, working in places like Venezuela and Brazil, in also in places that are forested, heavily forested. You develop almost a sixth sense of where these things are going to lie and where the best places are going to be. So over time, and we acquired this property in 2016 in Ecuador. We've put a lot of time in. We've spent over 60 million US doing exploration, and that's everything from soup to nuts. None of this belt was previously known geologically. In fact, the only people who had ever been in the belt to do exploration were the Spanish conquistadors, and we're talking all the way back to 1560. So we were really the first company to jump in and grab a very, very large land package. Now, I'll explain that, why we did that. Um, and as I said, in my previous company, we had 94,000 hectares. Now, think of it this way. Think of it this way. Okay, let's say that I'm in the city of Los Angeles and I want to go find a rental unit to live in, right? So what do I do? Well, if I want to find the best place for me, I would go around and find suitable neighborhoods, but I would look at many, 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 many different rental units until I found something that was the right location, the right price, and everything else. You don't just go and the first one and the second one and make an offer unless it's very, very exceptional. What I mean is that you need to be canvassing a very large area. And it's the same thing in geology. So if you have a very small, like postage stamp size property, the chances of finding something, especially finding something world class, is commensurately very, very small. If it is a very large area, it's almost like a shotgun approach. You have a situation where you have many, many different possibilities of finding not just one metal or maybe uh, different scenarios, different types of metals in the ground, but also, uh, geology, the way it works. Um, if you're examining a much, much larger area, the chances are you're going to find, uh, you have a better chance of finding something as long as you're well capitalized and as long as you have people who have very, very good technical skills at finding ore deposits. Um, I really believe that you will be successful. It's worked for me before in the past. It seems to be working now, and we've got a lot of stuff which is drill ready right now. And this is an exceptional property. It is very large. It's 500,000 acres in American parlance, and that is a very, very large area. But what have we found on it? We found, as I said, copper, silver, and sediments, which is more or less flat lying embedded. And this is a parallel to it would be Kamoa-Kakula, that Friedland's mining in the DRC, or the Zambian copper belts. So we've got that style of mineralization. On strike with it, on trend with it, we have a type of mineralization which in the trade is considered to be Mississippi Valley type uh, lead, zinc, silver, and it's called that because about 100 years ago, uh, they did find this kind of mineralization in the Mississippi Valley, and it's been named after that. But I'm not looking in the U.S. at Mississippi. This is certainly in Ecuador, and it is bedded lead, zinc, and silver, high grade in limestones. So we've got that second type of scenario. The third type is a typical epithermal gold, silver type of mineralization. Now, what we're doing, we're kind of being geologically quite cunning here. Rather than looking just for gold alone, we're looking for what are called pathfinders. And these are chemical elements that typically will occur with gold and will occur in a much bigger halo than the actual gold itself. So you can think of like a bullseye target. The target, the outer rings of the target are much, much wider than the center bullseye. Of course, we want to hit the bullseye, which would be the gold deposit, but you might find in the outer periphery of these things concentrations of things like arsenic, antimony, mercury, selenium, thallium. These are all what are considered to be pathfinders for epithermal gold. And epithermal means close to the surface, and this is resulting from volcanic activity. So we found we have many, many different anomalies that we found both in stream sampling and in soil sampling uh, that are pointing towards gold mineralization in the subsurface, and these things have got to be drilled. Now, I might add that the Fruta del Norte discovery has almost no gold at the surface. It's very, very, very low grade at the surface. However, it has very highly elevated contents of pathfinders, mercury, arsenic, antimony, and it was on that basis that we drilled those geochemical anomalies and came up with basically 200 meters of 4 grams per ton. Um, of course, we want to replicate that again, and but it's going to take a lot of drilling and it takes a lot of kind of geodetective work. The fourth type of mineralization is a conventional porphyry copper gold. Some of the targets that we have got molybdenum as well. That's a very typical thing for these types of deposits. I'm speaking to you today from Montana, and Montana has the very, very famous Butte District, a mine that has been going since about 1880, still in production today. One of the biggest revenues for the state of Montana, and that is copper and moly, copper and molybdenum. Very, very low levels of gold, and not economic for gold, so it's not extracted. But there are other places around the world, like say Bingham Canyon, which is in Utah, uh, not very far at all from Salt Lake City, and that's being mined by RTZ Kennecott, and that thing is has a lot of gold in it, and that's being mined for copper, gold, silver, and I don't believe maybe there's a small amount of moly there that's being produced as well. So each area is specific. Each deposit has a specific ratio of the different metals. We have a number of these different targets on our property. The one that's most advanced is an area that we call Awacha. That's up in the northeastern part of our concessions, and we've been spending a lot of time on that, doing a lot of geological mapping and sampling, and that's also ready now for drilling.
Keith, thank you for that. Lots of stuff happening here, lots of different deposit types, lots of work, and of course, with that kind of land package and just again trying to navigate and identify where to stick those drills is always quite a big challenge. And of course, when you have topography issues and all the other issues out there in the jungle, I can see how it's quite a process of exploration. And then just simply the high risk nature of exploration as well. It's super difficult to come across something like a Fruta del Norte. And so, good overview as to how things are going. Maybe just speak a little bit more to some of the specific areas that you guys plan to test in the foreseeable, let's call it 2 years, and just how you see you guys narrowing down that focus because you've got a large land package, so you could certainly be distracted on other things consistently with different targets. But talk about just how you guys see the future here at Lost Cities as far as some of the things you want to do over the next couple of years. We all assume, of course, the capital markets will be amenable to this, and it looks like very well that over the next 2 years we will have different conditions than we have today. But just talk about your overall goals and objectives as to what you want to focus on going forward here.
From market dynamics, it's quite interesting. Things have very much changed, as you're very well aware, over the last 20, 25 years, and especially with the rise of the internet and how promotion has changed. If you are interested in exploration companies, but you also want instant gratification, it is not the place to be. It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money to pull off a discovery. In the case of Fruta del Norte, we started in 2001. We made the discovery in 2006, and it didn't go in production until 2019 by other people. It takes a long time. The company was bought out in 2008. Then it went through several different ownerships before it was acquired by Lundin Gold, and they've managed to put it in production, and it's doing very well today. But it's a process. It takes a lot of time, and junior companies, you may be beguiled and told by various promoters that they intend to put their property into production, but the timeline internationally is between 12 and 15 years to get a mine operating, and the chances that you're going to get to it and ride through the commotion of maybe some political changes and changes in the market and all the rest of it, you're going to get whipsawed and you'll never ever get there. So my philosophy has always been to make a discovery, maximize that by uh, getting the share price up, and that's done by certainly by getting the word out about what you found, and then when you have a situation where you can get taken out at the top, and don't try to build it yourself because I've seen this. As I said, I've got 42 years in the business now, and this almost always ends in disaster. Back 30, 35 years ago, maybe you could have pulled it off, but today, with the timelines, especially with the environmental movement and with permitting, you're just not ever going to get there. Hand it on to a major and let them run with it, and maybe keep a portion or maximize the return to the shareholders at that point. And then you got money to play elsewhere, and like I did, sold up Aurelian, and now I've got Aurania, so I've got another sandbox to play in, so to speak. So that's what's guiding my philosophy. Now, when we started our work, we really, as I said, nobody had been on the property except the Spaniards 500 years ago, and we didn't know exactly what to expect. Of course, uh, we thought we'd find certain types of deposit, of course, but we didn't know that we would find a plethora of targets, which we have done. And I must admit that in the past it has been distracting. So, and at some points we've run away from gold and started chasing copper, or we've started chasing high grade silver, or whatever. Those days have ended. We've had changes in management of the company, and so what we're focused on very much now is to get the biggest bang for our buck and to really put something out there that's going to tease the majors into a joint venture or even a sale of the company. Uh, there is no company that I know of anywhere out there in the whole world in the Cordillera belts that has a land package like ours. We've had interest from every major in the world. We've had pretty much every major in the world in the data room at some point, and they're all watching and waiting for us to make a discovery. And all it's going to take is one high grade hole somewhere. Maybe that'll be copper, maybe that'll be silver, lead, zinc, maybe that'll be gold, and then we're going to have people coming to us and very interested in doing something with us. Um, all the preparatory work in that regard has already been done. We've got very good relationships with many companies around the world, and it's a question of getting it across the finish line here. We spent a lot of time already on this project, and as I said, um, that it takes time and dedication and money to pull off a discovery. But we've been at this property now since 2016, and our targets now are very much more advanced. We've gone through quite a few different scenarios, thinking about how mineral deposits have formed in this terrain, what the possibilities are, and now we've narrowed it down to a fairly small number of targets. But that being said, I've been trying to keep the whole property intact because that's what the majors want. If there's one, say, porphyry copper, there's going to be um, potentially a whole cluster of them nearby, or maybe several clusters in the whole district. So at this stage, it doesn't make a lot of sense to be giving away valuable real estate, because I know what it will happen. We'll have some other companies, probably from the junior market, sidle in right next to us, and maybe they won't be as professional as we are. And maybe they won't work with the indigenous people the way that we've cultivated through very long time and energy, extremely good relationships. Certainly we don't want to see that kind of thing jeopardized. All I can say right now is to watch this space. We are working diligently on this stuff. There will be news coming soon, I think, which will be very important for the company and for the whole thing going forward, and maybe a couple of surprises.
Because you guys have had this land package for quite a while, how has that changed over the period of time since you guys obtained this large land package back in 2016, roughly? Maybe just update the audience a bit here and just tell us, how the concession ownership has changed during that period of time with the authorities. If the cost to hold that is substantially increased, because it's a very large land package, and I absolutely agree why you would want to keep this together under one umbrella. But just talk about that ownership and if that's become very costly to the company.
Well, let me start with the original premise here. I suppose a number of your listeners will be familiar with the formative story of Aurania, but let me just reiterate it here because it's rather important to understand. Um, I first went to Ecuador way back in 1998, and I had been living in Venezuela and working on a diamond project in Venezuela. And the election was coming up where Chavez was running. My legal team advised me to leave the country for a while, saying that there would be violence. And in fact, there was. There was a lot of shooting in the streets. And it was a big question mark as where I was going to go next. And I had a friend who had taken a language course in Quito in Ecuador, and I'd never been to Ecuador before, so I decided I would go. And I showed up, and the way that the language school worked was you were meant to be billeted with a family, a local family, and they were given instructions not to speak anything but Spanish to you, so you were supposed to be in full immersion and learn the language quicker. So, very first night I'm there, and I end up in the household of a professor of history who taught at the International University in Quito. His name was Octavio La Torre, and he said to me he had done his PhD at Boston University and he was losing his Spanish. So he said to me, "What we'll do, we'll talk Spanish up until 8 o'clock and then only English." And every night at 8 o'clock, he'd bring out a couple of quart bottles of beer, and and usually they were the first of the night, and we'd end up speaking far into the night. And he was a very interesting gentleman because he had worked for the mines department as a historian, very odd, And the way that it worked, um, there had been a place in 1981 rediscovered. It was a mine of the conquistadors called Nambija. Now, this is very well known in historical documents. So he was an odd person because he had done work as a historian for the Department of Mines. And the reason being, there had been in 1981 a discovery by accident by two boys hunting pigs, wild pigs in the forest, of an abandoned conquistador mine called Nambija. And Nambija had historically yielded a lot of gold. They told their father about a tunnel they'd found into the side of the mountain. He came out to check, and within 1 month, there were 25,000 miners there. On the record, they extracted 2.7 million ounces of gold, but probably double or even triple that went underneath the table through the black market. It was a totally unorganized situation. So the government, of course, was very concerned about this, and they said, you know, there are probably other mines that are lost, that are in the documentation, historical documentation, and we just don't know about them. And we're going to fund an effort to go and find them by combing the archives. And so Octavio was given a, a, a job to go through all the various archives within Ecuador looking for references to lost mines. And he said to me one evening, he said, you know, there had been seven very important gold mines in what was called the Audiencia de Quito, which became the country of Ecuador. Seven of them, five of them have been relocated over time. The last one was Nambija in 81, and there are still two of them missing. And I said to him, well, do you know where they are? And he said, well, I have a very, very good idea. And so I said, well, you know, maybe we should form a company and go out and find these things. This would have been in 2000, and I went on to form Aurelian in 2001 in January, and then started work in the field. Uh, Made a discovery in a totally unexpected place, and kind of the historical stuff kind of took a right turn for the better. It ended up resulting in the discovery of Fruta del Norte, of course. But after Fruta del Norte was sold in 2008, I got together with the professor, and we took the search worldwide. Now, the government knew that there were other historic areas that were still lost in the records, buried in the records, and they hired Octavio to have a look through all this stuff, through various archives within Ecuador, and come up with some more. So I was speaking with him one evening in our English sessions, and he said to me, you know, there had been seven historic mines in Ecuador. The last one was relocated in 1981, and that was Nambija. But two of them are still missing, and they were arguably the best. One was called Logroño de los Caballeros, and the other one was called Sevilla de Oro. And I said, well, do you know where they are? And he said, well, I have a pretty good idea. And I just said, well, let's form a company and go and look for them. So we had this discussion in July of 2000, and January of 2001, after spending 2 months, 1 month in the U.S. Geological Survey library, reading everything I could on Ecuador, and another month doing the opposite thing in the Canadian library in Ottawa. I decided I had all the information I needed. I had to go there. And actually, on the first trip, within about 6 weeks, made a gold discovery, a brand new gold discovery, which eventually led to the discovery of Fruta del Norte. Now, this was really taking a left-hand turn from what was the intended target, which was Logroño and Sevilla de Oro. But nevertheless, it had a very good outcome because when the company was sold in 2008, that gave me the funds to support a worldwide paper chase. And so Octavio, who was retired by this time, and I went to all kinds of different archives around the world. We spent over a month in the Archivos de los Indios, the Archive of the Indies, in Seville, in Spain. We were in Madrid, we were in Lima, Peru, all over the place, and eventually uh, the, uh, the the search led us into the Vatican. And in the manuscript section of the Vatican Library, I found a very comprehensive report from 1628, pretty much giving you a roadmap of how to get to Logroño. It was still pretty vague in places, and of course, this is long before the time of GPSs and such. But I also had a map from 1584, the very first map of this part of South America, which showed the position of Logroño. So through a whole bunch of different, um, really detective techniques and combining geology with historical fact, we eventually, many, many years later, found the position of the lost city of Logroño de los Caballeros. Not a city as you would expect, uh, like um, like one of these lost Inca cities or Machu Picchu or somewhere like that. No ruins. This place had been a mining area, but they had mined alluvial gold, so placer gold out of a river, and they kept repeatedly going back to this place for 35 years and mining it during the dry season with more than 1,000 indigenous people who had been made slaves, and the Spaniards, probably about 15 of them, lived behind a wooden palisade in kind of an armed fort and administered this whole thing. The governor at the time, Juan de Salinas, who founded the area, became fantastically rich. He built a church and restored a convent in Rioja in Spain. That building is now being used as the local seat of parliament. And I went there and found some more information, actually, which led me to Logroño. Anyway, so that's that part of the story. Logroño, unfortunately, did not end up being a hard rock gold deposit, and it's actually just on the outside of our property, present property. It was staked many, many years ago by another gentleman and wasn't available to me. But in any case, we're much more focused on hard rock and the source of the gold, the source of the placer gold, which ended up becoming Logroño de las Caballeros. Now, the other place, Sevilla de Oro, we know where that is as well, but it's in a moratorium area right now, and unfortunately, we can't touch it. But gosh, we got a lot of other stuff to play with. Yeah, so that's kind of a wrap up of the historical stuff. The historical story took me into this area, and very, very well, it's almost serendipitous. It ends up being 100 kilometers to the north and in the same belt as Fruta del Norte. Who would have thought, right? 500 years later, it ends up in the same geological belt. But nevertheless, it got me back into the territory where we've made some fantastic discoveries.
Keith, thank you for that. Thank you for the backstory. Yeah, it's quite a history. And what's really interesting here is you know the history really well, whereas, you talk to a number of CEOs in this sector and they don't know the history and they sometimes don't even understand the underlying that they're dealing with. And you obviously have done a significant amount of due diligence here. And I do think that that type of preparation and planning will lead to success. Although, of course, success, the time frame is always questionable on that. And so I appreciate the comments there, and you guys are certainly working down that road. And it looks like there's definitely very big potential for the company going forward if we can finally pinpoint where some of that material is in the ground. We know it's there. We just got to find it, right? And I want to come to capital structure in a moment, but given that we are on Lost Cities for a moment,
Yeah.
just talk about what you see, Keith, with all of the information you now know. What are the next couple objectives that you think are absolutely critical to driving this company into discovery? And just talk about what those plans would be to potentially get to another major discovery in the region for the company, a time frame that you can select, but maybe the next 2 years or something like this.
Okay, well, if we had a much more vibrant markets, I think we already would have got there. We already would have had a discovery, and maybe the company would even be sold on. But unfortunately, we've been through this market malaise, which just seems to linger and linger and linger like a bad smell. Eventually, it's going to turn. As I said, I've been through many cycles like this before, and it doesn't matter. A lot of the commentators will say that gold is dead, gold investment's dead, the interest is not there anymore. But as I said earlier, these gold producing companies like Newmont and Barrick are just throwing off the cash right now, throwing off money, and they are so very successful. Um, and and this has got to eventually filter down to the man in the street, and we'll see a pickup of interest, not just in the majors, but in the mid tier, and then into the juniors like us. We're poised and ready to make a discovery. Obviously, it takes cash. I think we can wait it out. We have been, kind of in a little bit of slow motion for the last 2 years, but things are starting to pick up right now. And the next thing we want to do is an induced polarization survey over one of our gold targets, and move that ahead to drilling. And I think with the gold price the way it is being very robust, that's where we're going to get our biggest bang for the buck for the shareholders. And I might add, and you may not know this, I own 44% of this company, and I do not draw a salary. And I'll tell you, I am the only one in the junior space like this. There's nobody else who is that committed to the shareholders, to a project. There's a lot of companies out there, they call them lifestyle companies. They raise money. Most of the money will go towards paying salary of the president, the CEO. That is not what's happening in my case. So, and I've participated in almost every financing that the company has had. So, going forward, we are going to continue to work ahead in Ecuador. But as you alluded to in the opening remarks, we have been doing a little bit of a pivot to Europe. Reason being, we didn't know a couple of years ago which way the politics were going to go in Ecuador. That's something I don't have any control over whatsoever. It looked like the socialists were going to come back in the government, and that would have been very bad. Instead, we have a gentleman, uh, Mr. Noboa, who is very progressive. He comes from a family, actually a billionaire banana growers, and one of the foremost families in the country. And he is certainly very, very pro business and pro foreign investments. And so it's been a little bit of a renaissance. We've seen one company already been bought out by Silvercorp. That's a Canadian-based company, but has a lot of Chinese investment behind it. And they bought up a polymetallic copper, gold, silver deposit in here in Ecuador, and it's already permitted. It's called Curipampa, and that will go into production. Other things that have happened in the last 7 months. Barrick has entered into the country. They have a land position of 40,000 hectares. So they're here for the first time. And certainly, we all know that Mr. Bristow is no dummy, and he sees potential. not just in gold, but in porphyry copper as well. And he's made very, very big investments in porphyry copper in Pakistan recently, and bringing the project there forward towards production. Um, it's great to have people like that in the country. Uh, it's I often say, people ask me, they say, well, what's the country risk in Ecuador? And of course, it's South America and all the rest of it, and you have to deal with the vagaries of here. But I might add, well, look, we have the largest unmined copper deposit in the whole world, which is the Pebble deposit in Alaska, which has been in litigation for about 15 years and does not seem to be moving forward. There's a BHP RTZ joint venture, I think it's in Arizona, called Resolution, which is not moving forward. Um, any project, big project in Canada and the US right now attracts litigation. And quite often, the NGOs who are against all this stuff, they go after the soft underbelly, which they think is maybe the Bureau of Land Management, or the Army Corps of Engineers, or the Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service, is somebody else, the people who grant the licenses, rather than going after the companies themselves. It's more of a soft target. But in any case, what they attempt to do is to disrupt these things and drag it out until the company runs out of money and just throws up their hands or goes out of business. That is not the case in Ecuador. The government is very, very pro-business, as I said. Their major contributor to the GDP in the country is oil. But the oil has been extracted since 1969 and it is running out. Fruta del Norte by itself is 1% of the GDP of this country. 1%. And that could be duplicated again and again and again and again. There are only two modern mines in Ecuador. One is a copper mine, which is owned by the Chinese, and it's a little bit opaque as to what they're actually what their reserves and resources and their mining and how much money they're contributing to the government. But the other one, Lundin, is very transparent, and we know that's a massive success story. But most of the country is taken up with mining concessions. There's a lot of stuff going on. Some of it just doesn't make the front page of the newspaper. But I really do believe that this is like the last best place to be in the Cordillera of South America. Only 5% of the territory of Ecuador has been explored. Only 5%. That leaves a hell of a lot more. And we've got a big chunk of it. We've got, I think, about 3/4% of the whole territory of the country under our concessions right now.
Keith, thank you for that. And I like how you characterize the U.S. mega projects. That's exactly what happens. And of course, these are the same groups that try to undermine these attempts to build good long-term projects that have respectable characteristics and economic profiles, and also just overall responsible mining. These various groups use all of those extractive materials. So it's hypocrisy to its greatest extent. And sadly, there's got to be, I think I would call it quite softly, a restructuring of the system, even though that's unlikely to work. It's going to be much harder than that, I suspect, Keith, if we have any study of history. I can certainly respect what Ecuador is trying to do as a developing nation to underpin their economics and their society with good long-term economic drivers. And as I like to say on the podcast, you're not going to get there by bird watching. Bird watching is not going to sustain it. So we have to have multiple diversified industries, and it's very key that we do have this. And extractive industries have proven time and time again that you can have a lot of wealth and societal growth built on that. We're doing it even more. I mean, there's always bad apples, of course, but it's even more responsible today than it used to be. So anyway, appreciate the comments on that. On capital structure, before you mentioned your ownership, I think that's important to talk on capital structure for a moment and highlight that. But it's been a while, of course, since you've been on the program. But why don't we talk a little bit about the capital structure in terms of just the current shares outstanding, cash on hand, and how far that gets you down the road towards those next goals. And then also, of course, the equity held by the management team and board, which is a significant amount.
Well, first of all the directors are shareholders. None of them, our directors, receive a salary at this point. They're rewarded with stock options. So if the company does not do well and the share price appreciate, then essentially they get nothing. Yeah, that's the situation. So they're very focused and very aligned with the shareholders. Capital structure, we've got just under 100 million shares out right now. Considering the company has been around for 15 years, I don't think that's half bad. Now, for most of the life of the company, we were up around $4, $5. Really, when they brought in higher interest rates, it kind of put a pin in it. And we went all the way down to 17 cents Canadian. We've been building back since then. I think we closed yesterday at 58 cents Canadian, so that's really good. The lot in May was at 20 cents with a warrant at 40 cents. So that warrant is in the money, and all the people who participated, and myself included, are very happy with the performance of that share price. So, what has been one of the drivers right now? Well, we have found some more gold on surface, as I said, in Ecuador, and we have the people in the field right now chasing it up, and hopefully they're going to find a nice high grade system where it's all this stuff is eroding out of. Time will tell, and you just never know what's going to come out of the ground from week to week. Um, so that's really what's going on there. We're still looking and talking to major companies, and we have what we believe to be a whole cluster of porphyry targets at Awacha that need to get stuck with the drill. And they've never been drilled before. Now, down on our southern flank, there's another company called Solaris, and Solaris went from 30 cents up to a high of $17.50 on the back of a porphyry copper discovery. And we have porphyry copper on our property, but we just haven't drilled it yet. And of course, when they started to release the drill results, the stock really bounded up. It's I think it's presently around $6 or $7. I'm not quite sure, but nevertheless, it's quite respectable given the fact that that company, as well as ourselves, have had to issue shares, um, issue more equity to finance the exploration. But that being said, for us, even though we have increased the share count by a fair amount, the market cap is still very healthy, and we're looking at something in the region of 60 million Canadian market cap. And when you compare us with what's out there, we're doing very well, considering that it would be considered to be pre-discovery. So, I'm not. Of course, I pay attention to the share price all the time, and I'd like to see it increase. And I think, given the right marketplace, which is also something that I cannot control, but given the right markets, with a bunch of discoveries behind us, we could be quite a few multiples in share price of where we are today.
Thanks for putting that into perspective where things land here. And obviously, in order to drill some of those holes, you guys will need to raise some capital to drill out those holes under certain circumstances. So looking forward to seeing that progress and how that comes into being over call it the next 12 months or so. Keith, one of the
Hmm.
things you know really well is, Ecuador, very well. You guys have accepted the risk, and you've obviously compared that risk with places like North America risk, US and Canada, as you highlighted earlier. With your experience also with Fruta del Norte, has the environment changed for attractive deposits in Ecuador in terms of, what is an attractive profile and various key characteristics of a developable mine in Ecuador that would be attractive to a mid-tier or a major?
Well, I certainly know that the majors maintain listening posts here. Newmont is exposed to Ecuador through its very large shareholding of Lundin Gold, but they have an office here, or an office in Quito, and certainly they follow very closely what's going on. As I said, Barrick is already in the country and actively looking, um, and and BHP has an office in Quito as well. RTZ, I don't believe have an office, but they certainly have been very active over the years, and they were here in the past. They left for a number of years, and certainly they're if a very attractive discovery came along, they would pounce on it. The thing with Fruta del Norte, well, Fruta del Norte, as I said, was discovered in 2008, and it went through several changes of ownership. And I'm not going to mention any names here, but one of the companies that ended up with it was more interested in converting resources into reserves so they could leverage up on the stock market because resources are not considered to be an asset by the US SEC. And they wanted to borrow against it and leverage up, and not so much interested in actually putting something into production. At least that's my feeling. And then the project ended up in the hands of a Chinese group for 1 year that didn't pay the vendors, and it took a while for that deal to get extinguished, and finally ended up in the hands of Lundin Gold, who really went full bore on the thing, had many meetings with the presidents at the time, and got things done. And by meaning getting things done, there had been no the metallurgy had not really been figured out. There had been no condemnation drilling. There had been no engineering drilling. There had been no hydrogeology studies and engineering studies where eventually the two incline shafts went, the declines. And so it was almost like starting from scratch. But I take my hat off to the management of Lundin Gold. They managed to get the thing done and on budget, and certainly I think under time as well. And it's going great guns today. So people look at that. They look at that as kind of a template for what is possible in Ecuador. When I started in 2001, everyone told me it was impossible. But there's certainly a Canadian company that is making a lot of money and repatriating that money back to Canada. And the property has not been expropriated. There's been never any talk of that, of nationalization. It's gone ahead, and the company's paying a nice healthy dividend to their shareholders. It's a one project company, so it's all the revenues are just coming from that one mining opportunity in Ecuador. So as I said, this can be replicated again and again and again. The government is wants to see it happen. I think if overall the resources market was more robust, we'd see a lot more people participating in Ecuador and making discoveries, and probably more interest from the majors. As you probably know, most of these major companies do not grow organically anymore. They don't maintain their own exploration staff. They grow by M&A. And so the junior mining companies act as a seed bed for the majors. They go out and they find the deposits. The majors take them on, and they have the development risks, and they're able to wait it out and get these things done. Because, as I said, it does take a number of years. Typically, for a junior company, if it was going down the path of going into production, what would happen? after the initial flurry of discovery and the share price appreciating by maybe several 100%, when it enters the phase of when they're actually building the mine and there's not much information to drive the share price, you'll see the share price come down. And this was Pierre Lassonde put together something called the Lassonde curve about 30 years ago and illustrated this very, very well. So there's always a low in the life of a deposit or life of a mining company, if it's a one mine project, where they're building, and then when they actually get into production, you'll see the share price leap up again. And of course, Lundin Gold certainly showed that, and they're hovering around $20 a share right now. So yeah, it's Ecuador is a great place to be. And it's really the last place in South America that hasn't gone socialist. It went through that experiment. It didn't go well. In fact, the former president is under. He's been shown to be guilty, and he's in Belgium. He can't go back to Ecuador. He's been tried in absentia. His vice president is in jail in Ecuador doing a stretch for corruption. People are not dummies. They see this kind of thing happen, and they just decided that they needed to have a change. This is the change that's come about. There will be elections next year. President Noboa is finishing off President Lasso's term, and then there'll be presidential elections again. Noboa will probably, well, I think he's going to win, and he'll have another 4 years in power after that. So we'll have a lot of continuity.
Keith, thank you for that. Yeah, always good to put that stuff in context. And certainly we saw Lundin Gold go through that curve, as you mentioned there. And then, of course, we actually will be talking to Ron, hopefully here in a couple weeks, actually, to do an update podcast with Ron. And just really good work over there by Lundin Gold. They've done a fantastic job, and they've really set a model for development to production execution. And I think you kind of highlighted it too, that, Fruta del Norte is the bar in the country. But these types of larger projects, whether it be Warrenza Solaris or Cangrejos Alumina, these types of bigger projects. The execution is the most important here, which is coming up on at least the development and production side of things. And so I think people have a pretty good idea of how to compare what is really attractive. And Fruta del Norte obviously is the best example that we can give here. So I appreciate that. And then some of the politics and some of the trials and experiments, we've seen different things in different countries, Central America, South America, where we've seen some of these things attempted and issues with different mines, whether it's Cobre de Panama or some of the silliness around the politics that don't make sense. But then, folks feel the economic pain and then they start to realize, yeah, these ways are better and we should revert to those better ways. Nothing's perfect, but there are certainly some better pathways to take. So I appreciate the comments and thoughts on everything there. And I'd like to just ask you just a little bit more here. You already talked government, but maybe just the local community work, Keith, just a little bit here. I know this is a big focus for the company, and I don't want to diminish that. It is a big focus of the company here with this question, but talk about just in the local community, some of the things you guys are doing specifically on the subject of importance of mining and how this industry supports community development, and of course, growing skilled people, which leads to further opportunity in the communities, and of course bringing forward competent technical skills for people that help them in their own careers. Just talk a little bit about that, because you guys do a lot on community, and I'm not covering that in that question, but if you want to just take that away for a moment.
Sure, sure. So we're dealing with an indigenous community. They're called the Shuar. For centuries, they were hunter-gatherer people working in the jungle or living in the jungle. What they would do, the men would go out every day and hunt in the local vicinity of the village, come back at the end of the day having bagged a monkey or something like that. And the women would be responsible for growing things like manioc and such in the village to sustain it agriculturally. What happened though in the 1950s and 1960s, the government decided that they were going to start to divide up A lot of the more remote areas of Ecuador where the indigenous people lived, and they would have villages that they're basically made out of concrete blocks. Some of them with thatched roofs, some of them mostly with a roof of zinc on the houses, and they're in the same place for good. So they have their own territories. They don't overlap. So these people can't. Historically, what they used to do, they would set fire to their own village, and they'd move on to maybe a place that would be 10, 15, 20 kilometers away. Now, unfortunately, what that would happen, it was usually occupied by somebody else and it would lead to conflict. And the government decided that they would put an end to these conflicts by just dividing up the territory and having static communities. However, the what has happened though is that um, the people have nowhere to hunt anymore. So they can't go into the forest. Sometimes they have to walk for 5 or 6 days before they see an animal. And I can tell you that everything has been hunted more or less to extinction. There are no sloths, there are no deer, there are no armadillos, there are no any of these animals anymore, which are supposed to be very common in the jungle, and they've all gone into the pots. That's not a criticism of these people. They have nothing else to do and no source of income. So we've gone into this area, as I said, the 208,000 hectares, and it embraces a number of these communities, some of which are only 15, 20 people, some of them as big as 200 people. And over time, we have hired more than 4,000 people from the local communities, more than 4,000 since we started in 2016. Some of them only work for a week or two and they want to go and tend to crops or do something else. And some of them, we've brought them on and trained them up as geological technicians, and they've spent several years working with us. Also, what we've done, it's like part of giving back to the communities. We've done over 10 clean water projects because none of these communities have clean water. The statistics are that 86% of the people in these villages carry intestinal parasites. I don't believe that this should be happening in year 2024. And so we've had a program. I mean, we can't do everything all at once, but we've brought clean water to more than 10 villages, and that has made a very, very big difference to everyone. The kids were anemic because of these parasites, and now they're all gone, and they pay much more attention in the schools. The teachers tell us that we've made a real difference there. In fact, I'm going to Ecuador in just a few days, and one of the things I'm doing there is opening up a new school. It's a one-room schoolhouse that services one of the villages, and the school that they had right now, the roof was caving in and it was no longer serviceable. So we built a new one for them, and I'm going to be officiating at the opening ceremony. Another thing that we've done during the COVID, we delivered 18 tons of dried food to the communities. 18 tons, most of it in the form of non-perishables. So tins of tuna, things like that, spaghetti, dried pasta, rice, bags of rice, and they were very appreciative because the state does very, very little for them. They're in the border area. These are people who don't tend to vote, and they're largely have been forgotten by the federal government and even by the provincial government. And then finally, what I do, I maintain a private foundation. It's a Ecuador registered charity. It's called the Step Forward Foundation, and I've been running this thing in parallel with the company for a number of years now, and it does things that really the company can't do and would not be a responsible thing uh, to the shareholders. The shareholders want to see the companies find ore deposits, not do charitable work. So we pick up the ball uh, where the company has kind of started a couple of little things and then we followed through on them. Um, and that has made a very big difference. And then absolutely finally, one of the favorite things I like to do is every Christmas I go down to these local communities and I play Papa Noel. I wear this horrendously hot red polyester Santa suit, and I go around and I distribute candies to the little kids. One year, we distributed 4,400 pairs of rubber boots to the little children, and we did that because two of them very, very sadly stepped on poisonous snakes in the forest in their bare feet and were killed. And I wanted to make sure that would never happen again. So these boots get passed down uh, through the families and between families, and people are, little kids are still wearing them today. Every year we add more boots to the local communities so that if they've worn some out or they've run out, we supply them. And, every time I go down to a community, I give them a speech in my bad Spanish and tell them what we're doing and tell them what our intentions are. We can make a very, very big difference in in Ecuador to these people. Really, they've been left behind. Their literacy rate is 17%. Generally speaking, they live up until into their 40s, and there are a tremendous number of children. Tremendous number of children. And what are these children going to do when they reach adulthood? Because there's not much in the way of opportunity. Uh, Being a Canadian, I saw what happened in the Arctic of Canada uh, from 1990 onwards when they discovered diamonds, and the Dene Nation played a very, very big part in working with the mining companies, and the mining companies providing them with skills so that they could effectively participate and then run various service industries for the mining companies. So now it's a situation where in that part of the Canadian Arctic, the indigenous people actually have their own hedge fund because they've made so much money over the years from providing services to the mining companies that they've got a pot of money that they've invested. So this is kind of like the equivalent of the Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund, but for the indigenous people. And I can tell you, if we could do the same sort of thing in this part of Ecuador, gosh, that would very, very much please me.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it, and it's a very good initiatives on a number of those fronts. And I wish my Spanish was as good as your Spanish, and I just haven't practiced that well, and I know you have, so your Spanish has got to be much better than mine. So appreciate the comments on that. And I think it's just very important to utilize and use these local communities for the work, for the skills, for the community, for the association and the engagements together and some of these traditions and norms that are utilized in the local community. And always appreciate you talking about some of the experiences there and helping to treat some of the kids with clean water as a starting place, reduce some of those issues that you mentioned, and then also the boots for the snakes. Really good idea on that as well. So appreciate the comments there. Well, I just wanted to wrap up here, Keith. You mentioned France just a little bit, pipeline thinking of the company just beyond one jurisdiction. Would like to have you just briefly talk about that and if you see that Europe remains of attraction for the company or what exactly the plan is there as part of a, second jurisdiction potential pipeline.
Yeah, yeah. So, as I said, when it looked like the socialists might win, the election in Ecuador, there were a couple of things that kind of fell out of the sky. A couple of opportunities in France, primarily for gold, but also looking for other minerals, other metals like tin. And we haven't said too much about it because the concessions are not granted yet. They're under application. But there has been a lot of stuff in the French press because these projects have to go through a public consultation period, and there have been a lot of articles about my company and about me in French. So most of them are really just speculation. A lot of them talking about us opening a mine. We have no intention of opening up a mine today. We haven't even set foot on the territory to start exploration. So these are people getting way, way ahead of themselves. And of course, some of the environmental movement who are against mining pretty much anywhere in the whole world. They're kind of like Luddites. I don't know what these people want to do. They all have cell phones. They all are on the internet constantly trying to drum up support and all the metals that are needed for the green revolution and for AI and for all this other stuff. They seem to think that we're going to get all of our material by recycling. Never mind that the population of the world is increasing, and that countries like India and China, the people there, a few years ago there was no middle class, and now there is, and they all want the same sort of things like washing machines and TV sets and trips abroad to go on holiday that everyone else has. And who are these people to deny them so? So the consumption of metals continues on in leaps and bounds, and we have to satisfy that craving by the world to satisfy them. So in case of France, one of the things that we've been looking at is the metal antimony. Now, a lot of your listeners might not be familiar with antimony, but it is a very, very important and necessary component of solar panels. And the Chinese dominate the market like they do with the rare earth market. Now, last week, China came out with a directive that they're going to stop all exportation of antimony. What does that mean to the rest of the world? Well, there are no producers in the whole of Europe. There are no producers in the EU. So, where does the EU get its antimony? They've been getting it from China, and that's going to stop. So, they're going to be between a rock and a hard place because they're not going to have any, and they're going to have to find it from somewhere else. And the obvious choice is if there are potential economic deposits of this stuff within their territory, that they should encourage people like us to go for them, and certainly do the initial exploration to see if they're going to be worthwhile. And I think that countries should be encouraging this kind of stuff all over the world, so we're not beholden to Russia, as we are very much so for things like nickel and platinum group elements, or beholden to the Chinese for rare earths, which are an absolutely vital component in samarium neodymium magnets, in turbines that run the windmills to produce electricity, and a whole host of other uses. Um, you know, People have to grow a brain, or some people anyway, and let this happen. And I think there's starting to be a bit of a sea change against this kind of reactionism and NIMBY, not in my backyard stuff.
Yeah, Keith, it's pretty bad when you have a group that says you're planning on opening up a mine in France and you haven't even dug a shovel's worth of dirt that you could potentially plant a flower in your backyard in France. And here they are already accusing you of opening up a mine, a new extractive facility. And Yet, what is the context of a mine? Is it just a shovel of dirt to plant a flower? I mean, maybe in France that would be an open pit mine, Keith. I don't know. But it's interesting. And then you have all the NGOs that jump on this. And last I checked, I mean, I haven't done a lot of firsthand work on this, but my assumptions have been that generally the NGOs aren't out there punching new water wells or putting in water treatment facilities or really doing anything for the communities that they proclaim to be protecting. I'm not sure from what, but certainly they don't seem to be putting forth much capital to improve the communities or address specific community concerns, of which you only hear those concerns by establishing a relationship with the communities. Those NGOs are in and out. They don't stick around if you're lucky for dinner before they're gone, before they've got to get back to cell phone service and the creature comforts of their own 5-star hotel room. I just don't quite follow that bit. And just the stranglehold that energy metals, that China and Russia, of course, we know a little bit about this because you obviously have been in the sector and you know it. Uranium, for example, the stranglehold on energy metals by those two jurisdictions. And the reality is yeah, you could have a lot of disruptions, and the West, if you want to collectively characterize that way, is very close to losing its final expertise in fuel cycle. And really the countermeasure to, wind and solar, if you will, that source of energy is indeed, if you can't include fossil fuels, well, obviously the countermeasure is commercial reactors. Well, that's pretty close to losing expertise in the West, so it better reverse pretty quickly so you don't necessarily have to depend. And of course, we already are dependent on Russia for fuel cycle. But very good points, and I see where this is heading. And then also for the company to have a potential second jurisdiction that makes some sense. I can see why you guys are looking at this and looking at Europe. So appreciate that. And I'll take any comments that you have in addition to what I just said there. But I'd like to leave it there for now, wrap up. Final question for potential investors who are listing in, Keith. The company has a market capitalization of about 60 million Canadian dollars. Why should Aurania Resources be considered within the institutional, family office, and retail investors' portfolio at this stage?
You know, they say you can bet on the horse, you can bet on the jockey. And I guess I'm the jockey. I'm a big believer in myself. I've certainly put my money where my mouth is. I've already made it big once, and I certainly am going to do my utmost to do it again. And the shareholders are along for, well, I wouldn't say that they're along for the ride. I certainly appreciate that every last one of them is done, and I realize that they put their own funds at risk, and I take that very, very seriously. And I am putting my own wallet at risk as well on a level that's I don't think anybody else in the industry is doing. I am hell bent to make this a success, and it will be a success.
Well, I think that sums it up pretty well, Keith. Appreciate the thoughts there and how you see this going forward. And Keith, just remind the audience, what's the best way for interested parties to reach out to the company?
Well, they can send me a personal email at Keith at Aurania, spelled AURANIA.com, and I'll endeavor to answer each and every one of them. Please have a look at our website, Aurania.com. There's a lot of very, very good information there. Take a look at it. Just simply watch and wait. I'm not asking for the public's money. Watch and wait and see how we perform, and see what the future brings us. Not just the far away future, because I think we've already gone through our period of heavy lifting in this company, and now we're poised for some short term gains. So essentially, watch this space.
Keith, always a pleasure. Thank you for updating on the company. Best of luck in the coming months on progress, and we look forward to hearing from you again.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.